The Battle of Axanar continues, and today I'm joined by Carlos Pedraza from Axamonitor.
For 3 years, one website has aimed high, striving to be the best video podcast online, interviewing 24 sci-fi alumni, Australia's first astronaut, and producing a 3-week road trip focusing on science in Australia.
G'day everyone, and welcome to Australia's capital, Canberra.
Celebrating 3 years, this is the Trekzone Spotlight.
Carlos has been running the information wiki service Axamonitor for several months as the Axanar saga continues to grow. It's been a few months since I touched on the story, so he joins me now to bring us up to date. Carlos, thanks for your time, man.
Oh, it was great to be with you, Matt.
I guess the biggest piece at the moment is the recent news about the new TV series being set 10 years before Kirk's 5-year mission. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a period of time that's worth exploring. And it turned out to be, I think, sort of a false story that it was actually supposed to revolve around Axanar or the Battle of Axanar. And Brian Fuller pretty much put the stop to that rumor by saying that it was another event in Star Trek history that was behind was going to form the foundation for Star Trek Discovery.
Another thing that's come out in the last month from Reason TV is a video that we've watched. And in it, Alex says that CBS and Paramount are stifling the creativity of fans. Do you believe that?
I think that the video that you're talking about, which was produced by Reason Magazine, which is a libertarian magazine, has an agenda around not being interfered with, creativity not being interfered with, economics not being interfered with by the government, things like that. So this is very much in line with their philosophy. I don't think I think fans are entitled to all the creativity they can muster with intellectual property that they own. There's a different standard that you need to apply when they want to be creative with intellectual property they don't own. And here's the problem with that video and with the notion that fans' creativity is being stifled by CBS and Paramount. Really, the issue is not the creativity of fan films, not even that fan films exist. It's that this particular fan film went beyond creativity. It went beyond high quality, which Prelude to Axanar was high quality. But what happened was that they started creating revenue streams. They certainly didn't sell Prelude to Axanar online, but you can get DVDs and Blu-rays, and you can get Axanar merchandise, and there's a whole long list of everything from apparel to books and coffee. These are all revenue-generating activities that go, I think, beyond what's reasonable for fans to be able to expect to do with intellectual property they don't own. So that's where this is different. That's where I don't see this suit as a threat to fans. It is a threat to one fan, who's Alec Peters, and what he's been doing, which stepped over the line, I think, with regards to receiving a direct financial benefit from Star Trek property. And that's certainly what's alleged in the lawsuit, and what CBS and Paramount will strive to prove at court, or in a request for summary judgment, which may be coming up.
One other thing that I picked up in that video was a comment from Richard Hatch in which he said that the fans will generate, so fan films and fan product will generate more money and more revenue and more interest for the official products. Yet the Axanar camp seem, they have a strong advocacy for boycotting the film. Which way do you think that this goes? Do you think that fan films are actually a big thing when it comes to bringing more fans into a series?
Well, having produced and written for 2 different fan series, I'm pretty well aware of the extent of fandom around fan films. And while they're good numbers. They're not anywhere near the total number of Star Trek fans that are out there. They're a sliver of a population, and certainly that population is among Star Trek's greatest fans, and that's why fan films exist. But I think that the problem is that you can't draw a direct line on the economic impact of fandom on sales, but certainly no copyright holder wants to go out of its way to antagonize its fans, and that's why you haven't seen any lawsuits up till now, and that's why lawsuits. There's a term known as tolerated use when it comes to infringement by fans, either in fan fiction, art, or films. And that's where copyright holders try to strike a balance between keeping their fans happy, allowing them to play, if you will, with the intellectual property up to a point. And that point is when you start making money off of that property. So I don't think the economic impact is as great as we would like to believe it is, because fan films aren't going to bring new people in. They're going to, excite and intrigue existing fans. But, you have to really love Star Trek to already really to be a fan film fan for the most part. So I don't see that economic impact as being that great.
Yeah, it's very much, fan films are very much a subset of the fans. It's certainly not, as you said there, it's not something that's in the general audience's sort of frame of mind. It very much is fans wanting to continue telling stories and that sort of thing. And I certainly don't think from the guidelines are stifling creativity. It's certainly making people change the way that they think about making their own fan film in the Star Trek universe. And there's already been several examples since the guidelines were put out in June. There's been several examples that have been posted since then, and they're amazing pieces. And again, it's really coming back to the core of fan productions.
Yeah, I'm the first to be sad about the fact that the guidelines prohibit longer episodes, that they prohibit episodes, they prohibit series, which is too bad. It's unfortunately one of the costs of this lawsuit, I believe. But that said, I think that there's still plenty of room in a world that there's now actual permission for people to use without the sort of Damocles over our heads that that CBS or Paramount might sue a production. Staying within the guidelines makes sure that doesn't happen. But I think there's plenty of creativity in fans, and every production faces restrictions, both creative restrictions and financial constrictions, and sometimes those are the same thing. So I don't believe, I think it's an overstatement to say that fans' creativity is stifled. It is more accurate, I think, to say that fans' ability to make money off of intellectual property they don't own has definitely been stifled.
Mm. An interesting one, speaking about other fan films, continues have... There's a bit of misinformation around what Continues want to be doing. They've said that they want to finish off their series with 4 more episodes. What do you think about that? Are they finishing off what they have, which is within the guidelines, which basically stated anything from now needs to be within these guidelines, or are they sort of running a gauntlet here?
Well, that's a good question. From what I've heard, there has been constant communication between CBS and the principals at Star Trek Continues. That doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. Producing outside the guideline is not a guarantee you will be sued. That's why they're called guidelines. But they are going out on a legal limb, as it were. The folks at Continues respect CBS's intellectual property and have stated publicly that were CBS to tell them to stop, they would stop. So, they have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they believe that their fans, their donors, are due exactly what they've been promised. So that's what they intend to give them, unless CBS explicitly tells them not to.
And I love a parallel that I saw online in regards to Continues crowdfunding and Axanar crowdfunding. Continues raised a couple of $100,000 and have managed to make, or hopefully will manage to make, between 4 and 5 episodes on that money. Axanar raised $1 million and built and managed to half build a studio and have plenty of green screens around a half finished bridge set. I think that's a very interesting look inside the two mindsets of these executive producers of these two productions.
Well, it's a clear question of priorities and what priorities each production set, and Continues, obviously, because they produce so much content, prioritized getting content out as quickly as possible and as well as possible at the same time. Axanar took a different tack. They decided that they wanted to make what in their mind was going to be the best Star Trek fan film of all time, even though they actually initially their rhetoric was disdainful of the term fan film for themselves. They used the term fully independent professional Star Trek production, and the problem with that is they decided that to do that, they needed their very own studio rather than renting space, and they had to build one. So that's where the money went first, and actually producing the show, the movie, took second place, and those are just incontrovertible facts, and so it shows a different set of priorities. Now, to be fair, a lot of their fans are totally okay with that. They're okay with it taking this long. They're okay with their money being diverted to building a studio and to building an online store and to paying salaries to principals in the production. Unfortunately, a lot of their fans aren't. They would prefer that their donations had gone to what they believed it was supposed to go to, which was production of the film. And so that's where we're left. Where they're left is a studio, half-finished sets, a script that's in constant flux, mostly because of the lawsuit, and no sign of production proceeding at all. And that's with having raised $1.2 million. Continues with substantially less than that is continuing. So, and of course, the fact that their fans are all right with their money being spent in this fashion doesn't change the terms of the lawsuit, which is that they're accused of copyright infringement and in gaining direct financial benefit based on that copyright infringement, which differentiates them from the other fan films. And even the question of the studio, if you read Axanar's own words, they say their studios is explicitly different from the studio that Continues uses or that New Voyage is used, in that those are single-purpose sets. They're used only for the production of those fan films. Axanar's was intended from the get-go to be a revenue-producing activity and facility. And I know that, some of the Axanar people, Rob Burnett in a recent podcast, was saying, well, we're just trying to pay the rent because we committed to 3 years of rent. I'm like, well, that's a choice you made to commit to 3 years of rent on this lease. And so it's a problem you created, not a problem that's inherent to creating a fan film.
Yeah. And another thing that I saw online as well was that very much the progression over the last 15 years of fan productions, especially. I mean, fan productions in the Star Trek universe have been going since the 70s. But in the last 15 years, and it really started with Hidden Frontier and moving on from there. And everyone's tried to take that next step as things have become cheaper. And Alex said this for some reason he was invited to chat at Facebook headquarters, and he actually mentioned that the cost of all of this professional grade equipment is so cheap now that anybody can be making productions, and as a result of that, the quality is getting so much better. And I've said this in the past as well, to break through and get through to all these productions coming out of LA or the States, the quality has to be right up there in the script writing, in the production values, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that I'm not too sure on your feelings, Carlos, but I feel that we were always inevitably going to come to a point where it got too much for the studios. Not necessarily, it didn't have to end with Axanar, but it did. But I think that inevitably CBS and or Paramount would have said something about all these fan films that are going on and raising more and more money and getting more and more better quality.
Well, there's a couple of schools of thought on that, and I don't pretend to know what the truth in this with respect to them are. The Axanar folks like to claim that it was the quality of their potential production that proved a threat to CBS, and hence the lawsuit. But again, quality has been rising in all the fan films, or many of them, and none of them was threatened with legal action. So it goes beyond the quality. It does, however, have something to do with the fact that fan films started going into the territory of the kinds of productions that CBS and Paramount create. The idea that they're the ones that make network length episodes. They're the ones who create feature films. And fan films aspiring to this was something that was a cause for concern. But I think, based on my own experience as a fan film producer, that's always been a concern of theirs. And it was something about this particular production that really pushed them over the edge. And my belief, based on what's in the lawsuit, is that it had a lot to do with the financial benefit they were gaining from the use of the Star Trek property. The idea that two things, the cheapening of production technology and crowdfunding, were behind the explosion of fan films in the early part of this century, I agree with. We certainly did see that happen. Whether or not that meant it was inevitable that something like Axanar was going to happen is hard to say. It might have been inevitable that there would be some kind of restriction placed on crowdfunding, just because it was turning into kind of an arms race, which is the term that John Van Sitters from CBS used. But I think it's difficult to ascribe inevitability to this issue. We only know it was, or theorize it's inevitable because it happened once, but that doesn't mean it needed to happen to begin with.
What I love, there's another Kirk era fan production that has stepped away from making episodes, and that was announced shortly before the guidelines came out. That, of course, is James Corley's New Voyages. He's now moved into being a licensee of Star Trek now, and all of his sets that he was using to film is now a museum piece and a dedication to his love of Star Trek. And some people in Axanar have said, well, now you see he built the sets and he's going to be profiting from them. But Carlos, what do you think about that? Do you think that that's completely different? He actually made the product that he said to his supporters that he was going to make, and then he's moved on from something else?
I think two things. One is he certainly gave his donors exactly what he promised them. And they gave him resources to be able to achieve that. But, the important thing to remember is that New Voyages was producing episodes, hours of content before crowdfunding was a thing. Those sets were constructed before crowdfunding was a thing. The money they did raise followed what were thought to be the informal guidelines that existed for fan films, that basically, you told people exactly what the money was going for, and not just general production, but for specific things, and they knew precisely what that money was going to be used for. So that's the first thing, is that the donors got exactly what they were promised, and those sets largely were built by James at his own expense. He's made no money from Star Trek. He's starting to make money now as a licensee, but of course that's because he's a licensee, and that of course changes everything. And so is there something wrong or unethical about him being able to have become a licensee? I don't think so, because he's been above board about everything, about how he spent that money that came from donors. And, by contrast, Axanar claims to be transparent and open, but any, meaningful examination of their annual report and other documents that they say demonstrate that transparency shows it's actually quite opaque. Just because you put numbers in a spreadsheet doesn't mean that they're telling the story they're supposed to tell. And even Mike Bodden, Axanar's spokesman, said, I think the last time we were on with you and him, that it, failed to provide any meaningful information about how Axanar had spent its money. And then promised that there would be an accounting done by an outside firm or an outside accountant. That was 4 months ago. That's a long time for accounting.
It is, and it's a long time for not a lot of things to be happening, and there certainly doesn't seem to be anything happening now. Everything just sort of seems to have...
I'm sure something is happening. It's just not going to be in public view for a while. Discovery is going on with the case, and discovery is a quiet process, but an intensive one. So I have no doubt that that things are being found out, things are being discovered, and we'll eventually hear about them, assuming that a settlement doesn't happen. But the farther we get away from the time that a settlement appeared to be on the horizon, the less likely it seems a settlement is. And Rob Burnett, the director of Axanar, even told the Los Angeles Times and told a podcast interview last week that he thinks it's going to go to trial.
What are your feelings on that? Do you think it will go to trial?
I think what we're likely to see first is motions, possibly from both sides, for a summary judgment. And that's where each side basically presents what they've found from discovery that they think, makes their case, and asks the judge to decide whether or not the case has been made. And in the case of CBS and Paramount, if they can show, based on the law that and their discoveries in information from discovery that copyright infringement happened, then the judge can rule in their favor, and that's the end of the case, unless it's appealed, of course. Conversely, if Axanar makes their case, which is largely around fair use, then if they can make that persuasively based on the law, then they would get a summary judgment. The problem is that there's not really compelling case law around fair use when it comes to fan work of any kind, but especially fan films. And this case has the potential to be a landmark case because it would be, if it went to trial and a decision came out of it, it would be probably the first case that really established what the legal parameters are for fan productions. But most copyright attorneys that I found, and even in that Reason video that we talked about at the outset, the copyright lawyer that they had there said, look, there's not a lot of case law to show that there's been the kind of transformative approach to Star Trek in Axanar, what's proposed for Axanar, for it to fall comfortably within fair use. And the fact that, in copyright, you're either transformative, which means you're fair use, or you're derivative, which means that it's too closely based on the original art, and therefore you are infringing. And that's kind of the either or that Axanar is in, and they're making a what I think is a Hail Mary pass in terms of the fair use case they're trying to win. It's certainly an uphill battle, but I think that's also one of the reasons why the law firm that's representing them is representing them. They want to try to make a case for broadening what is transformative use, and therefore what falls under fair use.
Lastly, Carlos, is there anything that you wanted to add? Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about?
Well, I think, for me, I'm heartened by the fact that that this is still an issue for a lot of people that they're very passionate about. And I know there's vitriol probably on all sides around Axanar and what it's trying to do. But at the same time, I think there's also been a lot of community built on all sides around this issue and around what Star Trek means to people. And it's obviously something we're passionate about, and I see that as a good thing. I wish that more of the discussions were based on facts rather than opinions. That's the reason I started Axamonitor. I still try to make it fact-based completely, except, of course, when I publish opinion pieces or analysis pieces, and those are that way explicitly. But I work a lot every day finding out the facts that I can, and more coming down the line that should worry the folks at Axanar. So there'll be more news soon, I think. And so therefore more to talk about. But I'd really love to see the focus of conversations around Axanar really move to being about facts. And we can argue facts. I think that's fine. If you think I've published an inaccurate thing, then great, let's talk about that. Point it out to me. I'll fix it. But the idea that it has to be I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm right because I believe I'm right, it doesn't get us very far in terms of being Star Trek fans, and in terms of being people who have a stake in the future of both Star Trek as a franchise and Star Trek as a source for fan films.
Fantastic, Carlos. Well, it's always awesome to hear your insights into Axanar and read those pieces that are very meticulously cited and referenced, and Axamonitor really is one of those few sites out there that is actually publishing both sides of the story and also willing to post both sides of the story along with myself. I mean, I have absolutely no problem telling the side of Axanar. My problem stems from when we're called haters purely because we're posting the facts. and there has been comments about Trekzone as well, being very anti-Axanar, because I never seem to get anyone from the production. But Rob Burnett and I have supposedly been communicating for the better part of a month and a half, and still haven't organised a time to sit down and have a chat. So, yeah, look, I think, as you said, it is very much a divisive issue that is split right down the middle, which isn't what it should be. It should be a discussion about what has happened, and everyone should be respecting people's opinions. And there are some people on both sides that are taking this very personally, and it's become a very very heated topic of conversation amongst diehard Trek fans.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate. I actually took heart at the interview that you conducted back in April with myself and with Mike Bodden, Axanar's spokesman, which I thought was a very reasoned exchange of ideas and facts around fan productions in general, and about Axanar specifically. Unfortunately, Mike, is not armed with all the facts that I think to have a full discussion around those topics that he would need to really engage. I mean, so many of his answers were, I don't know, or I'll have to find out, or we'll see what happens. And but my point is that he has the right attitude, which is, let's talk, let's exchange ideas, let's be respectful towards one another, let's be civil, and let's agree to disagree. That's why we have a court system, to iron out those disagreements. And I wish more of the conversations were like that, and not enough are.
Fantastic, Carlos. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And let's just keep watching the web and see what happens with Axanar.
I'm sure there'll be more.
Like, follow, and subscribe to Trekzone.org on all of these social media channels. Hit me up and say good day. I'd love to have a conversation. A meaningful conversation would be absolutely wonderful. And I look forward to hearing other people's views on Axanar. Well, that is it for this edition of the Trekzone Spotlight. I'm Matt Miller. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again soon.